Welcome back to What Do They Know podcast. This week, the guys are each going to pick 3 of the wildcard games to go over and then 2 of next week's divisional matchup games. They'll break down all the games and let you know what they have their eyes on. But hey, what do they know?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the What Do They Know podcast. We are in wild card. Actually, we're in divisional round. We have completed the wild card round. All 6 games have been completed. Me and Jeff are doing something a little different this week because of the Bills' postponement and the game, being games Monday. Typically, we record on Sundays, and it didn't really make sense to us to only talk about 3 of the 6 games because that was all that was completed at that time. So we did not record Sunday. So what we decided to do is we each picked 3 of the 6 games, and we're just going to break them down for you. So you'll hear me or you'll hear Jeff first, and then we'll go to the other person, and we're just going to kind of break down the games and see what jumped out at us and preview the divisional round matchups as well. But before I do that, we always go over top stories. So I wanted to just go over, one of the bigger top stories every year after the regular season is completed, and that's just coaching firings, coaching vacancies. This year already, a week into the postseason, has been crazy. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 coaches fired, or mutually agreed to part ways, and that being Atlanta, the Chargers obviously did it in season. Las Vegas did it in the season, Carolina in season, and then after the season so far, it's been New England, Seattle, Tennessee, and Washington. And you think about some of the coaches that we're talking about that are associated to those. Obviously, the first one that jumps out at you is New England with Bill Belichick. Obviously, it's the craziest thing to think that he's no longer going to be wearing Patriots cutoff hoodies on the sidelines, but it finally happened. They mutually agreed to part ways. I thought they both handled it. Them both being, Belichick and Robert Kraft both handled it as well as you can, given the circumstances and how much Belichick has meant to that organization. I thought they did it with class. I'm really curious to see where he goes next. I've heard Atlanta a lot of he as we sit here Tuesday night, I'm recording. He interviewed with Atlanta yesterday. So he's already gotten the ball rolling, and I'm sure he will line up and talk with pretty much all of these teams, or at least all of the teams will want to talk to him. Another one that really, really shocked people was Tennessee letting go Mike Vrabel. Vrabel is one of the better coaches in the NFL. He's, tough. He's shown that he can win. I mean, he went to 2 AFC championship games with Tennessee with, not a ton of talent. Obviously they had Derrick Henry, but they still had Ryan Tannehill as a quarterback. And that's no hit at him. It's just the way that it is. He's not one of the top tier quarterbacks that you think of. And the fact that, Vrabel was able to turn that team around and take them to 2 AFC championships, I think shows a lot about him. And so he is going to be highly sought after. Everybody said that it was just a perfect fit for him to go to New England, but obviously that didn't happen. The very next day after New England parted ways with Belichick, they announced that they had signed Gerard Mayo, who was, everybody kind of assumed was the coach in waiting. So the New England spot is filled, but all of the other ones still remain open. And another big surprise was Seattle with Pete Carroll. Obviously, he's getting up there in age, but he still has more energy on the sidelines than pretty much anybody that you could think of. So to see him go, obviously, when they made their statement, they said that they're going to keep him in the organization in some capacity, more like front office, maybe an advisor role type thing. But that was really, really surprising. And you think about I want to say it was Monday into Tuesday was just an insane 24 hours because we had, Belichick leaving, we had, Vrabel and Pete Carroll leaving, and then in the college ranks we had Nick Saban retiring from Alabama. So I mean, the 2 most prolific coaches at least in my lifetime are both. One's going to be gone completely, and the other one's going to be on a new team for the first time in 24 years. So just crazy that's where we're at. I'm really curious to see who some of these teams get to fill their head coaching spots. I feel like in terms of, which one is a valuable or a sought after job, I think that the Chargers job, no, hands down, has got to be the best one, followed closely behind by Atlanta. I think that Atlanta has the pieces on offense. Jeff and I have talked about that all season long, how they've just underperformed on offense. And so I think if you bring in a guy like Bill Belichick, who's kind of a no nonsense, he's gonna set the tone and pretty much do a fresh start for the organization. Could be really really great. But I think with the Chargers having Justin Herbert, their franchise guy, already there, it's already been decided basically. I think that they're definitely the most sought after position. But I think whether people want to announce it or not, I think it's pretty much decided that Jim Harbaugh is going to come from Michigan and take that spot. So we will see. We'll see what happens there. But those two jobs are what stand out to me specifically. So and there's more. There's a high likelihood that there's going to be more to come. I'll get into that as I break down some of these games. But some of the action this weekend could very easily have resulted in some coaching changes. So that's my top story for the week. I'll jump into my games. So my games that I'm going to be going over: Steelers at Bills, Philly at Tampa, and the LA at the Lions. So just going in order of when they were played. Obviously, Saturday night, LA went at Detroit. It was the first home game for Detroit since 1994, I think it was. The atmosphere was just phenomenal. Obviously, I talked last week about how it was the game I was most excited about. And it was the best game of the week. Honestly, I think that's one of the storylines just from Wild Card Week in general, that these 6 games were not very good. Just being completely honest. This was the only good game. The other 5 were all blowouts. They were never really close. And so I'm really hoping for some more competitive games this coming weekend, the 4 divisional games. Everybody always says that this is the best weekend in football because these games are always just so good. And so I'm hoping they kind of make up for this weekend, because for the most part, they were really lackluster. There's a lot of storylines that came from them, but there wasn't a whole lot of suspense and wondering who was going to win, except for the Rams at the Lions. So the Lions ended up pulling it out 24-23. There were just, storylines all over the place for this game. Obviously, I already talked about Detroit hosting a game for the first time in a while, but the big storyline was, Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit for the first time, and Jared Goff also playing his old team with the Rams, because obviously both were essentially traded for each other. And I was really, really impressed with how Jared Goff played. Obviously he could have a chip on his shoulder because he was the kind of forgotten man. The Rams wanted Stafford, and he could have very easily came out and tried to do too much, and he didn't. They started the game. I don't remember ever seeing a start this great. I mean, they went on 3 straight 75-yard touchdown drives to open the game. I mean, that's about as great as you can do. I mean, his overall stat line, him being Jared Goff, he was 22 of 27, 277 yards and a touchdown. They were able to squeak it out. Obviously, it was a close game, but they're in a really, really good spot. And I actually think, we talked at length about the referee missed call when they played the Cowboys. Did he report? Did the offensive lineman report? Did he not? So on and so forth. And I kind of feel, and Jeff's obviously he's going to take the Packers and the Cowboys, so I'm not sure if he's going to talk about this or not, but I kind of thought that it was poetic justice that it happened the way that it did this weekend. Because if Detroit had won that game against the Cowboys, which they should have, they would have had to play the Packers. They would have been the 2 seed. And who knows what would have happened there. The Packers are kind of a buzzsaw. It wouldn't have surprised me if, the Packers did to the Lions what they did to the Cowboys. So, it ended perfectly for the Lions. They didn't have to play the Packers in the first round. And with Dallas losing, they still get the second home game that they would have all along if they had the 2 seed. So you couldn't have picked a better scenario for the Lions. I thought it was pretty much poetic justice the way that it happened for them. So, they set up nice. I think they have a really favorable matchup coming up next week at home against Tampa Bay. I'll get into the Tampa's game as well, and also break down that matchup. But that's the 3:00 game on Sunday. And so, I mean, as far as this game is concerned, it was a great game. Like I said, it was the only one that lived up to the hype, or I should say, had any hype at all or any intensity as far as who was going to win. So, really impressed with the Lions, and I love me personally. I love Matthew Stafford, so I was disappointed for him. But I think the Lions story in general is just a great one. So I was happy that they were able to get the win. And I love Dan Campbell. Again, Jeff and I have talked about him as a coach, how this team completely signifies him as a person and his personality. Just gritty, tough, and you listen to him in the locker room afterwards, like pumping up his guys, saying how good they did, and just things that he said, like he gave a game ball to the GM for putting this team together and making it fit his personality. And then he gave a game ball to Jared Goff, and all he said was, Jared Goff, you're good enough for Detroit, and everybody just mobbed him and hugged him and celebrated with him, which I just thought was awesome. It's so easy to like a guy like Dan Campbell, which ultimately helps you like the Lions. So I'm excited for their matchup next week. Next one, Steelers and Bills. Obviously, this one was supposed to be played Sunday at 1 o'clock, and with the massive snowstorm that Buffalo got, we didn't get it so much here in Rochester, thankfully. We just got kind of a dusting, but Buffalo got pounded with snow once again, so they moved the game to Monday at 4 o'clock, or 4:30, I should say. And, I mean, the final score, you look at it, 31-17. I don't even think it was that close, to be honest with you. I think that the score is really not indicative of the game. I thought Buffalo pretty much dominated this game from start to finish. Josh Allen played great. He didn't have, the typical turnover that you associate with Josh Allen. He didn't make the bad decision. He was in control. He was 21 of 30, 203 yards. He had 3 passing touchdowns, and then obviously he had the electric 52-yard rushing touchdown in the second quarter. And so he played phenomenal, which is what he needs to do. He needs to be great, and he needs to be in control for them to have any chance of continuing on. I thought as far as the Steelers are concerned, I thought they just, I heard it on the radio today with ESPN, so I'll give them credit. When you have a guy like Mason Rudolph as your starting quarterback and you're going up against a guy like Josh Allen, you have no room for error, none whatsoever, and they just made too many mistakes. Talk about Rudolph throwing a pick in the end zone. They had a fumble that Buffalo literally scored on the next play. So when you're specifically in the playoffs against any opponent, but especially when you could pretty fairly say that you're not matched up as well as far as quarterbacks are concerned with who you're playing, you have to be perfect. And it was always going to be tough for the Steelers having T.J. Watt out. He was the heart and soul. He is the heart and soul of that defense. Their record with him playing versus their record without him is just night and day. It's astronomically different. They are a much, much better team when he plays versus when he doesn't. And so, that was one where as soon as they said he was out, I kind of thought that this was going to be the outcome. And it proved to be true. Great season for the Steelers. Again, Mike Tomlin, 10 wins with a team that, you could argue probably could have had 5 or 6 wins with the amount of talent, the offensive struggles, the quarterback play. So the Steelers did it again. Mike Tomlin did it again. And I think that's one of the biggest storylines going into this offseason is Mike Tomlin and what he's going to do. He has 1 year left on his contract. The last several weeks, kind of before the Steelers really turned it on, he was getting some backlash from Pittsburgh fans saying that it was time to move on. It was rumored that he wanted to move on. And yesterday, it was one of the first questions that they asked. A reporter after the game said, and the way he handled this question, I feel like is very telling. The reporter, all she was able to say was, "Mike, you have 1 year left on your contract," and she didn't even get to finish her thought because he just abruptly walked out without saying anything. And so I think that is very telling. Like, that is obviously on his mind, and he's just not in a position to address it right now. So I think that's something to watch, whether he steps away to take a break, a sabbatical, whatever you want to call it, or whether they mutually agree to part ways and he takes a different position, because he will, behind Belichick, he will immediately become the most sought after coach if he leaves Pittsburgh, which again would be crazy. He's been there for 17 years and he's never had a losing season. I know Jeff and I have talked about that a lot, but that's something that I really don't think you could talk about enough, is the fact that he's been with this team for 17 years and never had a losing season is just incredible, and it's phenomenal. So we'll have to certainly watch what happens with Mike Tomlin. Lots of injuries for the Bills. The last thing I'll talk about specifically with this game is, it got to a point where the game was 24-17. Pittsburgh had kind of clawed back, and it seemed like Bills players were going down left and right, both on offense and defense. And so obviously we don't know the outcome of some of those injuries, if they're going to be just sit out a day at practice and you're good for next week, or if it's going to be something where, people are going to be missing some game time. And obviously, they host the Chiefs on Sunday. It's going to be, the biggest game of the weekend, in my opinion, the best game. And so if they need to be at full strength, so hopefully those guys can bounce back from some of the injuries. And if not, that's gonna play a huge role in this matchup with the Chiefs and what they do. So that's definitely something to look out for. Last one is Philly at Tampa Bay. And so I think now, obviously, final score Tampa Bay 32-9 over Philadelphia. And so I think it's you can officially say that the collapse is complete with Philadelphia. Obviously, I said, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, that I thought that Philly was going to go one and done in the playoffs, and it proved to be correct. They just looked like a shell of themselves. Again, Jalen Hurts, you could tell he had that dislocated finger last week on his throwing hand. He didn't throw a football at all this week during practice, and it showed. He just looked off. He didn't look comfortable. His finger looked disgusting. And so you can't tell me that didn't play a role in his performance and the performance, as a whole for the offense. They scored 9 points. Todd Bowles always is known for a good defense with Tampa Bay, but to only score 9 points is just, it's crazy to me. I was baffled by just the lack of tackling from Philadelphia. They just got completely worked on defense. Nobody could tackle. Their secondary looked absolutely terrible. I mean, two of the touchdowns from Tampa Bay were just essentially broken tackles. Long, quick throws, maybe 10, 15 yards, and breaking tackles left and right, and eventually, leading to a huge, 40 or 50-yard play. It's just inexcusable. The lack of tackling was dumbfounding, to be honest. And so this is another storyline with a potential head coach that, you prior to the season or even 7 weeks ago, you would never have said this, but Nick Sirianni could be on the hot seat, and I think he probably will be. The way that they collapsed, and you're hearing from Philly fans that they want Sirianni gone. A lot of people are saying that if they, part ways with Nick Sirianni, that Belichick, that would be his first choice. So we'll see what happens there. Obviously, the game just finished last night, or just happened last night, so they haven't made any decisions yet. My guess is they'll take, a few days to a week or whatever the case may be, and make that decision. But that is a really, really interesting story to keep an eye on, is what's going to happen now with Nick Sirianni. Because going into the playoffs, I feel like it was all about, okay, they really underperformed the last 6 weeks, but let's see what they do in the playoffs. And if they lose, let's see how they lose, right? And so to lose 32-9 to a 9-win Tampa Bay team who won the worst division in football is just terrible. It's just not a good look. And obviously it's going to point a lot of fingers right at the head coach. That's from a Philly perspective. Obviously, we got to give Tampa Bay their props. I mean, they just punched him in the mouth. Baker Mayfield, you guys know from listening to this show, he's my boy. I love Baker Mayfield. He played great. 22 of 36, 337 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is tops in Tampa Bay playoff history as far as yards. They played great. He played great. And so I'm really, really happy for Baker. I feel like, he was kind of the villain for a lot of people when he, had success in college and, played with so much swagger. And I feel like hopefully now people look at him different. I mean, he was knocked down. He got benched in Cleveland. They traded for Deshaun Watson. He got traded to Carolina. He was horrible with Carolina. He got released. He played a couple games in LA last year, and he kind of, he's revived his whole career, essentially, in my opinion, with his season in Tampa Bay. So I'm really happy for him, and I hope, he continues to have success, because I just love Baker. I love the swagger that he plays with and the confidence that he plays with. So, and then the last thing that coming out of that game, Jason Kelce, the center for the Philadelphia Eagles, announced today that he's stepping away. So, I saw on social media today from somebody who I know who lives in like the New Jersey, Philadelphia area, diehard Philly fan. And basically the first sentence of his post was that there aren't many people that mean more to the city of Philadelphia than Jason Kelce. And you could see him on the sideline as the clock was ticking down last night, getting emotional. He still had his helmet on. Afterwards, he walked to the stands and kind of had a moment with his wife. And so I think he knew, maybe even before the game, that this was going to be his last go at it. And so, that's big for Philly. He's, not only is he an icon for that city, but he's still a dang good center. and a dang good lineman. So they're going to have to replace him as well. But that's obviously a really big story, coming out of the Kelsey clan and Philadelphia as well. As far as divisional matchups, so I'm going to break down the NFC games. Obviously, we have Tampa at Detroit and Green Bay at San Francisco. One thing that I left thinking this weekend or wondering is with the performances of some of these teams, are the 1 seeds in both conferences in trouble this weekend? So obviously in the NFC, that's San Francisco, and the AFC, that's Baltimore. Baltimore gets Houston, who just completely throttled Cleveland. I did not see that coming. I'm sure Jeff's going to talk about that as well. Neither of us saw that coming. But both teams, you talk about Houston, who has to go at Baltimore, and then Green Bay, who has to go at San Francisco. They have just a ton of momentum going into this week. Green Bay completely throttled Dallas. Shocked a lot of people, shocked me and Jeff as well. He actually said last week that he thought that Dallas was going to throttle Green Bay, and I agreed with him. So to play the way that they did, I mean, they have a ton of momentum going into San Francisco, and you never know how the week off is going to impact the number 1 seed, right? So obviously in this case, it's San Francisco. They have a week off. Obviously, I've heard that it's done great things for McCaffrey. He had that calf injury. He sat out week 18. He sounds like he's good to go for this Saturday, excuse me. So obviously from a health perspective, it helped them, but are they going to be rusty? Are they going to come out with a ton of adrenaline? Are they going to be ready, I guess, is for lack of a better term. And so that for me is the biggest question mark, is you never know. Obviously the teams that you're facing, they won. They have a ton of momentum just from the fact that they won, but how they won, I think, also impacts that as well. And so Green Bay, nobody's playing better than Jordan Love. The last half of the season, he has been an absolute stud. It sickens me that Green Bay has done it again with their quarterback situation. I mean, you talk about going from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, now to Jordan Love. It seems like they are set up, not only with him, but the rest of their young talent. They're the youngest team in the league as far as age, and I think they're going to be good for a really long time. But as far as this week, I think this is going to be an extremely competitive game. Green Bay and San Francisco, as long as I can remember, have always played games that have gone down to the wire. And so I think this will be no different. Green Bay, like I said, they are playing with house money at this point. Nobody expected them to be here. And so, we'll see what happens. As far as Tampa at Detroit, I personally think that this is where Tampa's luck runs out. I think that this draw was just perfect for Detroit. Obviously, I already talked about it, getting the second home game because of Dallas losing, and then getting Tampa, who obviously they beat Philadelphia, and credit to them, but they're still a 9-win Tampa Bay team, who I think, as far as talent is concerned, they don't match up with Detroit. So I expect Detroit to win this game and move on to the NFC Championship, which would just be just a phenomenal story for football in general. Football, if you're a football fan, you got to be rooting for Detroit. And so I'm pulling for them, and I think that they'll both be good games. I think that Detroit might just have an easier time with Tampa Bay than San Francisco does with Green Bay. So those are the games that I have, and then obviously Jeff's going to talk about the AFC side with Kansas City at the Bills, which I couldn't be more excited for, which is the Sunday game, 6:30. And then he has Houston at Baltimore, which is the first game on Saturday. I think it's a 4:30 game. So 4 really good matchups, at least on paper. Hopefully they deliver, and we have some competitive games this weekend, because we didn't last weekend. So those are my thoughts for these 3 games and these 2 matchups that we have coming up. I am going to kick it over to Jeff for his take on his 3 games and his matchups. And we will see you guys next week. We will be in person next week, doing it, normal. Like I said, we kind of call the last minute audible this week, just because of the games not being played. And we thought it would be a pretty quick show if we were only breaking down 3 out of the 6 games. So hopefully this was okay for you guys. Hopefully it was still enjoyable, and I'll kick it over to Jeff, and we will see you guys next week.
Hey everyone, Jeff here. Here to bring you my thoughts on the wild card games. But in terms of top stories, I'm sure Nick already touched base on it. Coaching wise, this is about the time where teams that didn't make the playoffs, fire their coaches if they're going to move on from said personnel, and then move in a different direction altogether. Obviously, Bill Belichick is going to be the biggest name on the market. I'll talk about that more next week when I'm live with Nick. So we'll see what other coaching vacancies happen even throughout the playoffs. Obviously, there's some disappointments here and there. Philadelphia comes to mind. Who knows if Nick Sirianni is gonna remain there? But yeah, it's a lot of compelling head coaching positions that are vacant right now, and Nick and I will be sure to see which ones are the most, I guess, worthy of Bill Belichick's talents, and what other positions are going to be filled by who knows who. But yeah, in terms of getting into the wild card games, I want to start off with the first game of the wild card weekend, which was the Browns and the Texans. This game was actually the one I had highlighted for myself. I was honestly interested in seeing how C.J. Stroud was going to perform for his first playoff game. Joe Flacco, obviously being the veteran that he was, being a Super Bowl MVP, winning a Super Bowl, you would have thought he would have had a lot more composure, I suppose, than he did. The 2 pick sixes that he threw, that basically sealed the nail in the coffin for Cleveland. Honestly, it was excuse me, it wasn't a bad game at all. Up until those pick sixes, it was 24-14 with Cleveland driving into Houston territory. A score there would have cut it into a one-possession game. But obviously, Flacco threw a desperation heave throw. And credit to Houston, they picked it off and ran it back, and then did the same thing in the next drive. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where the wheels kind of derailed on Cleveland a little bit. I think Houston did a phenomenal job of taking Cleveland out of their game, which is their defense. Cleveland's defense is supposed to take over the game. Houston did not allow that. Myles Garrett didn't have any sacks. None of Cleveland's defensive players had any sacks. They were held to 0 sacks all game. So compared to Houston's 4 sacks that they had on Joe Flacco, so they had a game plan to control Myles Garrett, and they executed it perfectly. On the offensive side for Houston, C.J. Stroud, there's not enough you can say about C.J. Stroud right now. He went 16 for 21, 274 yards, 3 TDs. That's phenomenal, especially for your first playoff game. That's a way to make a statement that you're here. Nico Collins, he's proven to be that number one once again. He's definitely up there in terms of underrated and unheralded wide receivers, I believe. But he definitely carries the bulk of those targets and receptions there in Houston. Obviously, you have Dalton Schultz, Tank Dell when he was healthy, and then some other names there in Houston. But C.J. Stroud knows how to spread the ball really well. But Nico Collins will get the pressure catches, targets, and all that stuff. He's solidifying himself as a true number one receiver there. Now moving on to Miami and Kansas City. Obviously that game wasn't really pretty, especially for Miami's side. Yeah, I mean, weather-wise, that wasn't pretty either. -4 or whatever it was at kickoff, and then with a wind chill of -27 or somewhere around there. Miami, that was just the opposite of whatever Miami is used to. Obviously, it showed. I feel like, especially with Tua. Yeah, that entire scenario for Miami couldn't have gone worse. Losing to Buffalo at the last week of the season, losing the division, and having to play a road game in Kansas City. That was probably the worst case scenario, especially with the weather how it was. I personally thought Miami's offense was too much for Kansas City, but as soon as I guess the weather forecast came in, you kind of had a feeling that was more KC's game. Even though it shouldn't have been, I feel like Miami still had a rushing game that they didn't really lean on too much. Unfortunately, they led the league in yards per carry average at 5.1. There was no one getting more yards per carry than the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, Raheem Mostert was a big part of that. Achon was a big part of that, but they were held in check. And credit to Kansas City for knocking out the run game of Miami. But I mean, Mostert was a leading rusher, and he only had 33 yards. That's solidifying your defensive front for Kansas City and forcing them to pass the ball. As for Tua, he went 20 for 39. Didn't even eclipse 200 yards. Had one TD and one interception. That one TD is I'd credit Tyreek Hill over Tua on that one. Tyreek Hill had to come back for that, and then worked his magic and sprinted into the end zone. Tua honestly didn't look great. I'm not sure how much the weather affected him. Obviously, the more colder it is, the harder it is to grasp the football. But there were some throws there that I was just questioning how he was feeling and how he's looking. Some of his throws just did not look like they had any strength to them. Unfortunately, it was. There was a lot of duck throws there from Tua. Obviously, it's not a good look. He's going into the final year of his rookie contract, so from what I hear, Miami is all in on Tua. They're going to revisit contract negotiations with Tua and try to get him extended. But after that game, he didn't help his cause at all, I feel like. But I mean, it's not all Tua's fault. I feel like they had a run. I mean, obviously you ran and you have the talent there. You ran throughout the season and averaged what you did for a reason. It's just one of those things where they just couldn't piece it together that day. Defensively, I mean, it's hard to really rag on them because if you saw the game, there was a segment there and a little box of who was injured for Miami, and I think they said it was like over 20 sacks that they were missing defensively just through injuries. That's production that, regardless of how you scheme and how you game plan, that's production that you just. It's very hard to overcome that loss from Miami. Patrick Mahomes, though, 23 for 41, 262 yards, one TD, so he took advantage of the non-pressure, I guess you can say. Isaiah Pacheco, 24 attempts for 89 yards and TD. I mean, obviously the yards per carry attempts on that one isn't superb, but 24 attempts for Isaiah Pacheco. He's a grinder. He's a punisher. 24 attempts trying to tackle that guy it's gonna wear down the defense for sure. And you could just tell Miami's defense was just one step behind, especially in the pass game. Rashee Rice is coming to his own over there. He had 8 receptions for 130 yards and a TD on 12 targets. That's nothing to sneeze at right there. Obviously, the game plan against Kansas City all season long has been contain Travis Kelce and try to force Pacheco and any of their wide receivers to beat you. Tony was inactive for that game. I'm assuming it was a healthy scratch. I'm not sure if he was injured or not. That's something someone will have to double check for me. But Rashee Rice is definitely the standout wide receiver there. It's basically him and Kelce in the pass game. Kelce had 10 targets, 7 receptions for 71 yards. He doesn't have to be the machine that he always has been. Now that Rashee Rice is kind of coming to his own there. So game planning against against Kansas City is going to be a little trickier now. Obviously, you can't focus all your attention now on Travis Kelce. You actually have a wide receiver to worry about. You have a running back there that's going to try to grind you down. So Kansas City, credit to them and Andy Reid over there. They're starting to puzzle it together, I guess, at the right time. It'll be interesting to see how they approach the divisional round against Buffalo. But that's definitely a matchup I feel like favors Buffalo. But if Kansas City has definitely put all the puzzle pieces together, it'll be quite the matchup against the Bills. But again, Patrick Mahomes didn't get sacked at all, and KC actually had 2 sacks against Tua and the Dolphins. So you're kind of seeing a theme here where if you don't get sacks, your defense is going to have a long day. Obviously, that's always been the case, but it gets exaggerated even more and highlighted even more during the playoffs because this is where it's all made right here. But yeah, Kansas City came in with a game plan, and I feel like they took advantage of the elements there, the weather, and Miami just looked uninterested in playing in that sort of weather. I'm sure going all season, they probably, especially after a hot start, they probably had a home playoff game in mind. Having lost the division the last week of the season, it was just a momentum killer and I guess a morale killer too. So it's just one of those things where I'm not sure how much Miami was, I guess, invested into playing in the cold weather rather than in the Miami warmth. But yeah, I mean, obviously you can't question a team's will to go travel and play a playoff game on the road, but it just looked like Tua and the rest of the Dolphins just were not the oiled machine that they have been all throughout the year. And this happened last year too, where they kind of faded away during the second half of the season. That's what I felt like was going to happen this year, but it happened a lot later, and that kind of secured their playoff spot. It cost them the division, and obviously it cost them a playoff round too. Now then, I guess the highest scoring game of that I'm covering is the Packers and the Cowboys. Obviously, it was 48-32 Packers. Even with that score, a 16-point deficit, I feel like the Packers should have won by a lot more than that. Obviously, a lot of those points from the Cowboys were garbage time points. There was a lot of garbage stats there for Dak Prescott. I mean, there's not enough I could say about Green Bay and how they came out. Jordan Love looked phenomenal. He looked the best. Him and C.J. Stroud, I don't know who had a better performance, to be honest with you, between the games I covered. In terms of all the games, Baker Mayfield may have a case for it. Jared Goff, just emotionally. But in terms of pure performance, C.J. Stroud and Jordan Love was not outdone by C.J. Stroud at all. Jordan Love came in and and took it to Dallas really well. He finished with almost an identical stat line to C.J. Stroud. 16 for 21, exactly same completions, attempts and completions, 272 yards, so that's 2 yards less than C.J. Stroud, and 3 TDs as well. So they both showed out in their first playoff game of their career. There's just no way. I didn't anticipate Jordan Love to be looking that phenomenal during this time of the year. Obviously, being in Dallas in an inside stadium could have helped. I mean, if this was a game that was played outdoors, maybe in Green Bay, would he have looked as phenomenal? Maybe not because of the weather. But he took advantage of being indoors and in Dallas. Obviously, the Packers have a recent history of destroying Dallas in every way, shape, and form. That's probably the one team Dallas does not want to ever see again, to be honest with you. But yeah, Jordan Love, I can't say enough of how he looked. He made Aaron Rodgers-esque throws all over the place, prime Aaron Rodgers-esque throws all over the field, flip of the wrist, off balance, not even feet, not even set. He was doing things that Green Bay has come to see from their quarterbacks for a very long time. So for now, it looks like he's there to stay for quite a while. Outside of Jordan Love, Aaron Jones did what he wanted in the run game. 21 attempts for 118 yards and 3 TDs himself. That's phenomenal for a running back, especially Aaron Jones. He looked vintage Aaron Jones on that one. Obviously, he's been in the league for quite a bit now, but Aaron Jones he took it to Dallas on that one. He has a history of doing that as well. Romeo Doubs, Dallas didn't really have an answer for him either. 6 receptions, but 151 yards and 1 TD. That's quite the insane yards to reception ratio right there. Yards per catch for Romeo Doubs was pretty high. So offensively, Green Bay, they had nothing that really didn't work against Dallas. They could do anything they want at any time, at any down. It didn't matter. Green Bay was on it, and it'll be interesting to see if they can carry that momentum against San Francisco. So we'll see how that works out. But in terms of Dallas, obviously Dak Prescott finished with over 400 yards, but like I said earlier, is a lot of garbage time stats. He threw the ball 60 times. That's not necessarily a recipe for success in the NFL. He got 3 TDs, but 2 INTs. Obviously, he threw that one INT inside their own red zone to Jair Alexander. That was a backbreaker for Dallas, and then he threw another one that was a pick 6. That was those turnovers were killers for Dallas. Obviously, Dallas has a great offense and whatnot, but that entire game, everything just did not look as fluid as it had been all year. You could hear Greg Olson, the commentator for the game, always point out that CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott weren't on the same page. It was just one of those weird things where you don't know why it's happening, or especially now in the playoffs where you just had 18 weeks to figure things out. All of a sudden, CeeDee Lamb, the NFL's leading receiver, is not on the same page with his quarterback. That was very interesting to see. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I mean, in terms of stats, CeeDee Lamb had 9 receptions for 110 yards, but that was on 17 targets. 17. That's a lot of balls thrown your way, and to not even get double figures in terms of receptions is a little rough. Obviously, with that many incompletions throws to your number one wide receiver, your drives will stall, and then you're putting it to a team that didn't even have to will their way. They were just taunting the Dallas defense. I feel like there was just no stopping Green Bay's offense that day. And here, keeping up with the theme of pressure, there were 0 sacks for the Cowboys and 4 sacks for the Packers. So essentially, if you protect your quarterback, all three teams that won over the games that I've been reviewing, all 3 teams protected their quarterback. They didn't allow any sacks. So obviously, giving your quarterback the time and an opportunity to scramble or to go through his progressions and find the open man, that obviously helps a lot. But yeah, C.J. Stroud and Jordan Love really balled out. Patrick Mahomes did all right, but Jordan Love and C.J. Stroud definitely just stood out for me in terms of those 3 quarterbacks. Now I'm just going to move on to the divisional round. I'm going to be covering the AFC for next week. It'll be just something quick. Obviously, we have the Texans at the Ravens. on Saturday. It'll be the first game of the divisional playoffs. It's going to be an interesting matchup. Obviously, Houston coming off that big win against Cleveland. Obviously, we all knew Cleveland's defense is legit. Baltimore's defense is nothing to sneeze at all either. Baltimore leads the league in points per game allowed. They lead the league in rush yards per game and turnover differential. So this is a team that earned their number one seed in the AFC. They were definitely the class of the AFC in Baltimore throughout the year. So it'll be interesting to see the upstart Texans go into Baltimore and see what they can do against that defense. And Harbaugh, John Harbaugh. Right now, they have the Ravens at 9.5-point favorites. Honestly, I feel like the game should be closer than that, but who knows? It's an outdoor game. CJ Stroud, I'm not sure how he's going to perform with a lot colder weather than it was in Houston and indoors. But I mean, obviously, with Baltimore leading the league in turnover differential, CJ Stroud is going to have to take care of the ball. He can't turn the ball over. He can't throw interceptions. He's going to have to, if he has to run the ball, scramble, run the ball. You can't force it over there in Baltimore. It's going to be one of those things where CJ Stroud is going to have to take another step in his progression there. In terms of defensively, Texans are going to have to do the same thing they did with Joe Flacco in Cleveland. Force some mistakes from Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Lamar Jackson isn't, I guess, known for his playoff. I guess I wouldn't say expertise, but his playoff magic. We'll go with that. I don't want to say he's a choker or anything. Not Lamar Jackson. It's just one of those things where his struggles kind of get emphasized in the playoffs because league MVP. He's been in Baltimore for a while. He gets this contract and whatnot, but Lamar Jackson is a legit quarterback and he's a legit threat. It just happens that I feel like he just runs into defenses that are better than, I guess, regular season defenses. And they come prepared for what he brings to the table, which is his legs, basically. So now that with this year where he's kind of relied more on his arm, with Tom Bonkin and that offense, I feel like he definitely has the tools now to overcome what defenses kind of try to maintain him inside the pocket and make him a pocket passer. I feel like all year he's been playing to showcase his arm talents and how much he's grown as a passer. So honestly, this is going to be a phenomenal matchup in my opinion. Lamar Jackson, seeing how he performs, given his playoff struggles, and then CJ Stroud, if he can continue his playoff, I guess emphasis on his first his rookie year. That'll be interesting to see. And then moving on to the Chiefs and the Bills, I feel like these teams always play one another in every postseason. Last year they missed each other, but 2 years ago and 3 years ago they played each other. Chiefs came up on top both years. 3 years ago was in the AFC Championship game, and then 2 years ago was in the AFC Divisional round. This is the AFC Divisional round, so there'll be a rematch there. Obviously, the other two times were in Kansas City because the Kansas City Chiefs were always the number one seed, I would say, during those 2 years. So for Buffalo to actually have home field advantage in this, I feel like is an underrated advantage right now for Buffalo. Kansas City, obviously coming out of that cold weather against Miami, the weather here isn't going to faze them. But at the same time, I feel like the Bills are definitely the better team. Josh Allen, I feel like even with all the turnovers, I feel like he still has played better than Patrick Mahomes throughout the year. obviously it's a rematch from earlier in the year where Patrick Mahomes, that you could see the frustration boil over on Patrick Mahomes, and then that kind of started kind of a little bit of a downfall for Kansas City until they perked back up. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Bills tackle that offense now with Rashee Rice and Isaiah Pacheco being more forefront in that offense than Travis Kelce is. But I mean, it's good. I wouldn't expect a high scoring game in this because these teams actually have top 5 defenses in terms of points per game allowed. I think the Chiefs are like second and the Bills are fourth. It's just one of those things where obviously you think Kansas City and you think Buffalo, you think Josh Allen, you think Patrick Mahomes, and you think points galore, whatnot. But these defenses are I would argue these defenses are the reason they are here instead of the offenses. So it'll definitely be a matchup worthy of watching. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting matchups across the AFC division. Nick will take care of the NFC and preview that side of the bracket. But yeah, next week we'll hopefully get together again Sunday night when most of the games are concluded, and we're probably going to be watching the Chiefs and Bills game Sunday night. So no, that does it for me though. So I'll see you guys next week, and yeah.
Thanks for listening to What Did They Know podcast. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media outlets to see future episode details, and don't forget to send in any questions or topics that you want to see the guys discuss in their weekly episodes to come.